Hey, it's Jordan with TYT Network, and here with Lulu Freistad. You are one of the authors of a report Election Justice USA just came out with. It's very thorough, 39 pages, very scrupulous, and it goes into detail with a lot of abnormalities that showed up this year, particularly on the Democratic primary side. There were also some findings on the Republican side as well. And you have a history as a journalist. You've worked for both, mainstream outlets like NBC, CNBC, a couple others, and you've also done award-winning documentaries. So you kind of took it upon yourself to look at the numbers in the Democratic and Republican primary because there were things that are very out of the norm. This could very quickly kind of devolve into math that nobody understands. So for the layman who might not understand, what was the overall finding of the report?
I just want to clarify also, the report is an independent report. It was put out by, I'm the lead author on the report. I have a statistician partner. His name is Anselmo Sampietro, and we worked in collaboration with a very well-known statistician, Fritz Schuren, who works with the George Washington University and with NORC. And we did get some support from Election Justice USA, but it is an independent report.
Right.
And what we found is very concerning. We looked at the statistical patterns of election results going back to 2000, and we found that many of those results are not following normal statistical patterns. And what we mean by that is we have a normal statistical pattern that we expect to see, and then when we see deviations from that pattern, we're concerned that there's something wrong with those results. And our findings are there are many of these elections where the pattern is irregular, and in all likelihood, the explanation is some kind of manipulation. And the reason why we say that is because we went through and we looked at other explanations. We said, could there be a demographic explanation for this? And we found in case after case, no, there wasn't demographic information strong enough to support how far the pattern had deviated from a normal statistical pattern. We said, could it be error? And we do think there could be errors. A lot of these electronic machines are over 10 years old. But when we looked at the patterns are always deviating in the same direction in general, favoring one candidate and depressing the votes of another candidate. So when you have errors, you usually have errors that are random. Sometimes one candidate is favored, sometimes another. It's more mixed up. And these results were not like that. So we didn't think that the deviations were due to error. And the most likely explanation that our team found and that the data indicates is some kind of manipulation.
And when you look at on the Democratic side, you were explaining it to me that in the law of averages or math, pretty much in the beginning when small precincts come in on primary night, you could have fluctuations. But once you're having tens of thousands of people voting, you start to see percentages kind of sinking in, and on a graph, it'll show up as a pretty, flat line for both candidates. Can you kind of explain that and what you ended up seeing?
Right. So first off, I encourage people to read the report. It is a little bit long. It's 39 pages, but we tried to make it very user-friendly in the sense that it's easy to read and you don't need a lot of training to understand it. There's also a shorter excerpt. The website is electoralsystemincrisis.org. And there's also a lot of graphs there that you can look at yourself and see what we're talking about in terms of how far these patterns are deviating from a normal statistical pattern. The work that we're doing is based on the law of large numbers, which is a mathematical principle. It was proven and published in 1744 by Jacob Bernoulli. And what it says basically is that as we accumulate larger and larger numbers, those numbers should average into as they should come up as the average of the whole group. It's easier for me to just read an actual definition because it's more precise. So a definition of the law of large numbers. It's a principle of probability and statistics which states that as a sample size grows, its mean, which is the average, will get closer and closer to the average of the whole population. And that's basically the premise of all polling. What it means is that if you have 8 people and you take an average of that group and you think it's representative of the entire city, it's not, because you only had 8 people, right? So maybe those 8 people all think, that candidate is great. But when you go out and you survey a larger population, you don't turn out to have a representative group there. But as you get larger and larger numbers, you will get a more representative number. And that's what you want to look for when you're looking at a statistical pattern of the election results. As you get larger and larger numbers of the votes, you would, in a normal statistical pattern, see those votes graph as a flat line. Because eventually, by the time you get 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 votes, you have the average support of the candidate. And what we have seen historically, that's why it was so important that we went back and we looked at elections from 2000. That is what we used to have in this country, elections that graph as a flat line. And we have those. You can look in the report and look at the elections from 2000 that we charted, and they are just as flat as a pancake. And you do not see that now. When we looked at these 21 different states in the primaries, in both the Republican and the Democratic races, we saw statistical patterns where as you move into the larger precincts, we chart the technique that we're using is called a CVT graph, and we go into it in the paper. You can understand what we're doing. But basically, we're charting the precincts from the smallest to the largest. And as you get into the larger and larger precincts, we find that one candidate will get a greater and greater percentage of support. So, for example, in Louisiana, by the time you get into the large precincts, Hillary Clinton's level of support was 24% greater than her support in the small precincts. And Sanders' support was 12% less. So when you're talking about 200,000 votes, that is not a normal statistical pattern. By that point, you should have had a candidate hit their average percentage. They shouldn't keep going up and up and up. So it's not a normal statistical pattern. And when you're talking about differences like that, when you're talking about a 36% difference from the reported totals, you are definitely talking about amounts that could change the outcome of an election. And we did find that these amounts were great enough, and you can see them on the paper.
The states that you looked at on the Democratic side, the trend that you kept seeing was Hillary Clinton's totals going up where they shouldn't, and Bernie Sanders' totals going down where they shouldn't.
That's one reason why we're saying it's not error, because we're seeing one candidate consistently favored. So we posted these yesterday, these differences between a normal statistical pattern and the results that we're seeing. Alabama, 28% difference. Connecticut, 9% difference. Delaware, 12% difference. Georgia, 10%. Illinois, 8%. Louisiana, 36%. As I said, North Carolina, 10% difference. Tennessee, 8% difference. And this was in state after state. There was really almost no state that we looked at that did not have statistical irregularities on either the Democrat or the Republican side. And I just want to add, on the Republican side, it was Trump's percentages that were going down consistently. So we look, and you don't see this in the hand-counted precincts. You only see this in the machine-counted precincts. In the hand-counted precincts, that chart that we do is flat, just like you had in 2000. It looks like a normal statistical pattern in a hand-counted precinct. Mm-hmm. So in Wisconsin, they have hand-counted precincts and machine-counted precincts. And when we graphed the hand-counted precincts and looked at the difference in percentage of support between hand-counted and machine-counted precincts in Wisconsin, Trump had 17% less support in the machine-counted precincts. That is really significant.
Right.
It's a significant difference. And so I know no one wants to talk about this narrative that Trump is saying about how he's concerned that the election isn't going to be honest, but that is a concern that is supported by our data.
And when you say for Clinton it was 26% different, 12% for Sanders different, you're talking about different from statistical norms in the past, going back to 2000?
In that case, we are talking about what we consider the statistical norm for that race.
Okay.
So we put, you can see on our graph, there's a dotted line that shows where we would expect the statistical norm to fall.
Right.
That's where we would expect the election results to be in that particular race. And the results do not come in at that point. And so we measure the difference. And one thing really interesting in Louisiana is that you see all of these other candidates who were also on the ballot, like De La Fuente and there's a whole there's a whole slew of other candidates on the ballot besides Sanders and Clinton, and all of their percentages plummet as Clinton's percentages are going up. And there's really no plausible explanation for that. But we do think that in all likelihood these votes are being manipulated.
So let's get down to the nitty gritty. When you say manipulated, are you talking about machine rigging? Are you talking about, machine error? What kind of manipulation?
Right, we're not talking about error. Error is different from manipulation. Error is an accident, means, and we have seen that the machines do have errors, especially if they're not calibrated correctly. You can punch one candidate and it goes to another candidate. But there are actually so many different ways. And I encourage people, I made a documentary that explored a lot of this. My documentary is called Holler Back, Not Voting in an American Town.
I really don't believe that money is the problem.
We need more communication.
Democracy at its best is about people speaking to and talking with one another.
It can't always be on television.
I've never thought of any of this stuff.
Just talk to me.
And the website is hollerbackfilm.com. And there's a clip there, 5 minutes, watch it. We show a hack of the AccuVote TS machine that Alex Halderman did along with Ari Feldman when they were graduate students at Princeton. And it took them 30 seconds to unlock the machine. And then they planted malicious software in the machine with equipment they got off the internet for $15. And that malicious software spreads from machine to machine in the course of normal election procedures. So they don't have to access more than one machine because those machines are constantly being updated and different processes are done. So that's just one way. There is also research done by Bev Harris at Black Box Voting, and Bev's recent research is about how it is possible that the actual software that the machines are running has a code already built into it that would allow someone to change the percentages using fractions, basically. So they would assign a smaller fraction to one vote, and maybe one vote is assigned a third of a fraction, and another vote is assigned, times 3, and that they could that software literally could be built into the machines already. Mm-hmm. So that's another point of attack. And there's actually a great article on the Daily Beast that goes through 4 different potential attacks. There are many, many ways to attack these machines, and it's not hard. And when you think about what is to be gained, when you think about the federal budget, which is billions of dollars at stake, and how easy it is to manipulate these totals, you have to think that it's quite likely somebody is already doing this because there's so much to be gained, and they're really not protected in terms of the security.
And obviously this is just speculation, but I'm curious, it's not an invisible force who would be manipulating this. So do you think that if all this helped Hillary Clinton and hurt Bernie Sanders, or on the Republican side, most of the time it hurt Trump, do you think it's, state by state leaders who kind of instructed their minions to do whatever? Obviously we don't have proof. I'm just trying to get an idea who does the manipulating, if that's the case.
We really have no idea right now who's doing it. I don't know who's doing it. I would very much like to investigate that. So I would put out a call. I've been working with different networks. I am very much interested in investigating this further, and I'm looking for a media outlet to investigate it with. So I think it's something that really needs to be looked into.
Right. And let me ask you in terms of the statistical norms. You were saying around 5,000, 10,000, it should be flatlining. Louisiana, you gave us that example. Where
it's hard to say a particular number. Every election is different, but there is a certain point at which it depends on how many votes are in that particular election, at what point you would expect it to flatline. Sometimes it takes like 25% of the votes, sometimes it takes a longer. At some point, you do expect it to flatline, yes.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt.
Because I know, when I'm watching, when you're watching right out of the gate, you'll see crazy numbers. Like I was in Indiana, and right out of the gate, Hillary Clinton was up 10 points, but it was expected to be close. So what you're seeing is, like you said, when it's only a handful of people or small counties, it could fluctuate. But what would be the acceptable fluctuation? You were saying these numbers where Hillary Clinton shot up, 26%, where Bernie Sanders went down 12. What would be the acceptable number where, all right, that's a little abnormal, but nothing, no smoking gun there? Is it maybe like a 3% fluctuation, 5%? What is the bar where this is higher than the norm?
I think that's why it's important to work with very qualified statisticians. That's why I'm working with people like Anselmo Sampietro and Dr. Shurin, is because they have a lot of experience in this. Dr. Shurin has monitored elections internationally and was also someone who was turned to help interpret the results of the elections in Florida in 2000 and wrote a book about those results. So I think when you're talking about that kind of work, you really want to look to people who we trust and people with expertise with these kind of numbers. In general, one of the reasons that we're concerned is because we're seeing in state after state after state, and we're seeing this pattern multiply.
Right. And you had mentioned to me yesterday when we were talking about New York, I was familiar with it because there was the whole voter purge and all this, but there was Staten Island, Brooklyn had abnormalities. Can you talk about that?
We were very concerned about the New York election. The New York election the statistical results are highly improbable, especially in Richmond County and Staten Island. If you look at the graph for that, it's in our paper, and you can see that Sanders starts with a very high level of support, and Clinton is below him, and by the time you get into the large precincts, those results have completely reversed. It's literally an X instead of a flat line. There's really no demographic explanation for that. The demographics of Staten Island are pretty, pretty normal. There's nothing radical about the Staten Island demographics that would explain that somehow in the large precincts, these candidates are getting reversed totals. So we were very concerned about the results in New York. And I really do want to emphasize New York is a state that votes with optical scan machines. People vote on paper, and then that paper is processed by an electronic machine, and then those totals are processed electronically, and they are tabulated centrally. So there are many points of security weaknesses in that system, and people should not be reassured that they are voting on paper if it is being counted by a machine and tabulated by a machine. And that is why we are really encouraging people to get involved with election integrity groups like Election Justice USA or whatever election integrity group you choose. There are groups all over the country that have been focused on this for years. And we support hand-counted paper ballots. They need to be handled with secure chain of custody. That means you need to know at all times what has happened to the ballots. And then they need to be processed openly, where there is scrutiny by the media and the public. And that means that we need to literally take a photograph of each ballot and itemize it 1 through 200,000 and put it online so that everybody can count at their house and we can all agree that this is what the actual ballots, the paper ballots that people actually marked themselves say. Maybe that's the process that we need to go to. And I do want to emphasize that when you look at European countries, European democracies are counting on paper ballots. And there was a great article that came out in Politico by Ben Wofford and that talked about all of these different hacks and how easy they are. That article, I think, is called How to Hack an Election in 7 Minutes. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that article, he points out that 8 of the European democracies that have experimented with digital have come back to paper. Right. Hand-counted paper ballots, processed with secure chain of custody, open to the scrutiny of the public and the media, is the most secure system that we can have.
And in the election we just had, the Democratic primary, what was estimated? What was the ratio in terms of machine counting versus just normal hand paper ballots?
There just really aren't that many counties counting by hand. The one county that we really feature in our report is Columbia County, New York, and they have a great system there. They do use the optical scan machines, which is good because, I mean, the machines do give you a precision as a baseline. But what they do at the end of the day is they take all those, they have paper ballots, and it's important, the difference between a paper ballot that someone marks themselves and a paper ballot that is generated by the machine is very different. If you look at that clip in our film, Holler Back, you can see that the paper trail is actually electronically, the paper trail from the machine is electronically manipulated. So the paper trail from the machine is very suspect. But if you have a paper ballot that a voter marks themselves, that is clear voter intent. And if people, human beings, count those paper ballots one by one by one, then we really know who won the election. So in Columbia County, they take those paper ballots that people have marked themselves, and then they count them in public in a process that is very transparent. And they count 100% of the ballots. I know it seems tedious, but if every precinct is doing it, it doesn't take that long to do it at the precinct. And then the results need to be announced there at the precinct. That is another safeguard. And that's another thing they point out in the Politico article. Announce the results at each precinct publicly.
And last question, would you say, just based on your research, that the Democratic primary in particular, do you think the result, I mean, she won the nomination, so would you say that's highly suspect, illegitimate, and would you call for further action?
Yeah, we recommended that election was decertified. Overall, the average that we found was a 12.82%, almost 13% difference between the reported totals and what we thought the vote actually might have been. And we're doing further research, and those numbers may change, but if anything, they might change it to a larger percentage. And if you do the math on that and you see what 13% would do, it would bring that total that she had, I think 3.7 million votes, down to almost 200,000, and then Sanders had another 130,000 that he won in the caucuses. It would bring her lead down to a very minimal amount. And what would really be great is if we would count the paper ballots that we have. We have paper ballots in New York State. Let's count them. And then we'll have some idea of how those machines are comparing to what the ballots say. But we are not counting the ballots, and that's another thing to be aware of. These reports that are coming out, for example, CBS just did a report that said that 60% of the states are conducting audits. I'm not quite sure where they're getting that information, because in our research, we found that only 12 states are on record as doing audits of every candidate in every election. And even that number we found to be very misleading, because New York was listed as one of those 12, and New York does not do meaningful audits in any sense. So we are not even checking the paper that we have right now.
Right. And just like a common sense question, I looked at your graphs, and it's clear to me that there's abnormalities. Why is none of the other pollsters, the Nate Silvers of the world, are they not seeing any changes from the norm? I mean, it's not opinion, it seems to be math.
I think it's really hard for people to accept this information. I think as a nation, we really want to hold on to this idea that we're the best democracy in the world. We do it right. We're the original democracy, and we've committed, our whole self-image is tied up in the idea that we're this great democracy. And if in fact we're not counting the votes accurately and people are winning that people did not vote for, then we're not a great democracy. We're just kind of a mess right now. And actually, reports have come out saying that. There was a report from Harvard that ranked the U.S. democracy worst, the absolute last place of the international democracies. So this is not just our report saying that we have a lot of problems. This is something that the rest of the world has recognized. And it's very hard for us as Americans to open our eyes and wake up. I think there's a groupthink that says everything's fine, our elections are good, and we don't want to look at it. And I have to say it's really sad, because you cannot fix a problem that you cannot acknowledge.
Right. And one more time, where can people find this report and other information you've done?
electoralsystemincrisis.org is the report, and my documentary, hollerbackfilm.com.
Great. Thank you for taking the time. As you do more research, I'll follow up with you.
Thank you so much.